communications for American Muslims for Palestine. AMP has decided to come out with an ad campaign talking about Israeli apartheid and U.S. foreign aid to Israel. The mission of American Muslims for Palestine is to educate the American public and the media about issues related to Palestine and its rich cultural and historical heritage. Can you all hear me when the trains are going by? Okay. So it's our mission to educate the public and the media about Palestine and its rich cultural and historical heritage. We also want to raise awareness about the occupation, which is illegal and against international law, and the many human rights abuses perpetrated by Israeli policies upon not just Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but Palestinian citizens of Israel who face discriminatory, institutionalized discrimination, and the Palestinians in diaspora, many of whom are not allowed to return home. So that's what AMP does. We're joined here by many solidarity partners. Our first speaker is going to be Raja Abul Haq, who's the president of our New York chapter. We also will be joined by Jews for Palestinian Right of Return, Awda, the National Lawyers Guild, and Wespac.
Okay. So my name is Raja Abul Haq, and I'm from American Muslims for I'm the president of American Muslims for Palestine in New York. We are in American Muslims for Palestine really aim at educating the public about Palestine and about its rich cultural heritage. And for that matter, we're really here today to focus and talk about the United States financial support to the State of Israel. During or while we as New Yorkers are suffering from Hurricane Sandy, you know, unemployment, tough economic conditions, mainly maybe even tuition hikes, we're really sad at seeing that our administration is choosing to use our tax money and give it to the United States, to Israel, to continue its illegal occupation of Palestine. So in our campaign, again, we talk and we focus about the financial and military aid granted from the United States to Israel. Israel actually utilizes this money, utilizes the aid, utilizes the weapons to even continue in colonizing Palestine, to continue in violating international law by committing heinous crimes against the Palestinians. And we talk about the agreement, mainly the agreement or the memo of understanding between the United States and Israel, granting Israel $30 billion within 10 years period. During that period, the 10-year period which ends in 2017, New York taxpayers will be paying $2.5 billion in aid to Israel to continue its occupation, illegal occupation. Finally, I would like to remind you, I would like to tell our fellow Americans that this money could be, especially during this tough economic conditions, really could and should be used within here in the United States, in New York, to help our people in New York City. And maybe a small example that this money can be used to provide healthcare coverage to 2 million New Yorkers for a 10-year period moving forward. So we're really today launching this campaign to call for an end to Israeli occupation and colonization of Palestine, an end for Israeli apartheid, and finally an end to the U.S. foreign aid to Israel. Thank you so much.
Okay, touching on Raja's point, I read in the Defense News yesterday that President Obama, during his trip to Israel, had talked to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He wants to extend this memorandum of understanding, which does end in 2017. That was the $30 billion package over 10 years. He wants to create another memorandum of understanding for another 10 years, beginning in 2018, for $40 billion. And that's a pledge that he made to Benjamin Netanyahu at a time when Americans cannot afford to send their children to school, when we have people without health care and our social programs are being cut. Our next speaker is Lamis Deek, who's the director of Awda New York. And a reminder to our speakers, each speaker has 2 minutes to speak before we get to Dr. Bazian. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to make sure, mic check, everybody can hear me. My name is Lamis Deek. Awda is the Palestine Right to Return coalition, and as a New Yorker and a civil rights attorney, I'm honored to join in launching this ad campaign. The hallmark of an authoritarian regime is censorship. And when that censorship spreads beyond the borders of that authoritarian state and infects our society, then we too have become unwilling victims of that regime. For 65 years, the Israeli government has ruled Palestine by policies founded on the racist ideology that the native Palestinian people, by virtue of their ethnicity and religion, are inferior to Jewish immigrants slated to confiscate their lands. And it has implemented those policies by laws which institutionalize that racism, depriving Palestinians from returning to their homes, from marrying spouses of their own choice, from working and owning freely and mixing with the imported population by countless laws. In the West Bank and Gaza, Palestinians suffer under the last colonization project on earth, brutally enforced by the fourth largest military power in the world, by unconditional military and political support of the American government, and under the cover of a ubiquitous campaign of censorship launched throughout the world, and most insidiously here in New York and in the US, where it has taken cover under the anti-Muslim rubric advanced by the most extreme elements of our society. Criticism of the Israeli regime has led to the destruction of people's careers, has become grounds for government repression, and has deprived our city and our nation of its right to freedom of speech and right to information, upon which hinges our ability to intelligently participate in this democracy. This campaign is a critical step toward piercing the muzzle and lifting the blinders of the racist Israeli narrative. It is a critical step toward reclaiming our constitutional rights from the fangs of Israeli apartheid. And we are all the more hopeful that it will empower our friends, our neighbors, fellow New Yorkers to call for an end to our government support for Israeli apartheid, military occupation, and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lamise, eloquent as always, and her words are extremely important. Our next speaker is Abi Hassan of the National Lawyers Guild.
Hello, I'm Abi Hassan. I'm with the National Lawyers Guild New York City chapter. The National Lawyers Guild was founded in 1937 based on the belief that human rights are more sacred than property interests. Throughout our history, we have supported this belief by supporting liberation struggles. In the 60s and the 70s, we supported black liberation and Indian movements, as well as the women's movement. In the 80s and 90s, we supported gay liberation movements, South African democracy movement, and other movements. Today, the American military empire and its client states are the major contributors to the systems of oppression in Palestine and in other places. Our military-industrial complex feeds Israel's occupation-industrial complex, making peace an impossibility. We are enabling the most racist, violent, retrograde elements in U.S. and Israeli society. We must end this system. We must end this oppression. We must end the apartheid in Palestine, and we must end this empire of ours.
Thank you very much. And moving right along quickly, our next speaker is Felice Gilman of Wespac Foundation.
Well, thank you. I'm Felice Gilman from the Wespac Foundation. Wespac is a peace and justice organization in Westchester County. We are so happy to see this ad campaign go up on train platforms in Westchester County. It's really, as we view it, it's a very important step forward in informing people about what the situation is between the U.S. relationship with Israel-Palestine. So why do people care? Why should Americans care that Israel is running an apartheid regime in the West Bank as part of its illegal and long-standing occupation of Palestine? Well, I think it's really simple. Let's start with the fact that there's $3 billion annually of military aid going to Israel. And since the foundation of the State of Israel, military and economic aid to Israel has been $230 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money. All right? We are basically supporting and facilitating this apartheid regime. It means something to Americans. Our Congress people and senators are talking about removing this aid from the sequester. So they are taking money directly from health, education, welfare, traffic control, air traffic control, and innumerable other things in order to aid the State of Israel to maintain its apartheid regime. That's one reason. Let's have another. If you liked watching American troops torture people and raid homes and create hatred in Iraq and Afghanistan, you can thank the relationship, the military cooperation between the U.S. and Israel for that training. Let's take another reason. If you like the program that the New York City Police Department has had of surveilling the Muslim community, of invading mosques and basically infringing on people's freedom of religion and free expression, well, the New York City Police Department has a branch in Israel. And that is they are being trained in the same techniques which have fueled the apartheid regime. There are many, many reasons why Americans need to understand that the relationship of military aid and the apartheid regime in Israel are one. And we're very happy to see this ad on our train stations and our platforms.
And next we have Michael Letwin from the Jews for Palestinian Right of Return.
My name is Michael Letwin, and Jews for Palestinian Right of Return and Labor for Palestine are proud to stand with AMP and many other organizations to demand an end to all U.S. money for Israel. Just as such support once maintained Jim Crow in the U.S. South and apartheid in South Africa, our government now spends $3.5 billion each year for weapons that kill and maim in order to deny Palestinian human rights. In the great tradition of the Montgomery bus boycott and the South African anti-apartheid divestment campaign, Jews of conscience oppose this U.S.-sponsored Israeli apartheid, not only in the 1967 territories, but discrimination in 1948 occupied Palestine and denial of Palestinian refugees' right of return. Contrary to President Obama's ongoing support for this apartheid regime, Jews for Palestinian Right of Return believes that justice demands a democratic state throughout historic Palestine, from the river to the sea, with equal rights for all. And we will not be silent.
Our next speaker is Dr. Hatem Bazian, the chairman of American Muslims for Palestine. Dr. Bazian is a professor of Near East and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also greatly involved in the Islamophobia Center at Berkeley. He has also been an adjunct professor at the Bolt School of Law at Berkeley. And he is the co-founder of Students for Justice in Palestine, a Palestine solidarity campus group that now numbers in the hundreds across the country and in a few foreign countries. So here's Dr. Hatem.
Good afternoon, or good morning for you. Thank you for coming in here to see the unveiling of this national campaign that focuses on three concepts or three issues that are intertwined. One is U.S. policy relative to Palestine. Second, U.S. aid to Israel. And third, apartheid and the increasing segregation that is taking place inside the occupied territories. Now first, as President Obama has visited Palestine recently, we understand that U.S. policy toward Palestine has been completely, almost hijacked by AIPAC and its many influential spokespeople in this country. So much so that every time that the U.S. Vice President, President, or Secretary of State visits Palestine, he is met with a settlement. It seems that the peace process has been more like Israel wanting another piece of Palestine, where the United States is utterly silenced and incapable of actually mounting a pressure. It seems that Israel runs our policy and not ourselves running our own policy in this country. The President spoke about a two-state solution. And once again, the two-state solution is already dead because Israeli settlements have already devoured much of the West Bank, where settlements are already taking every corner of the West Bank. Bypass roads and security zones have encircled the Palestinians, and not to forget the apartheid wall, which has been built on Palestinian land, as the International Court of Justice have demonstrated that this is an affront to international law. Moving settlers and building settlements on occupied territories violate the Fourth Geneva Convention, and Israel stands in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the United States, by extending its support to Israel, is acquiescing to the violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention in this regard. Second point, on U.S. foreign aid to Israel. So far, the United States has spent over $230 billion of foreign aid to Israel. And every year, the United States allocates $3 billion of direct support to Israel. But that's not the whole story. Israel received a variety of other supports. It received forward deployment equipment. It also are forgiven of loans that are given to Israel from the United States, loan guarantees. It also allows many Americans, Jews, to donate to Israel, and that is also tax deductible. By allowing this foreign aid to go to Israel, the United States is essentially supporting Israeli policy of expansion, of continued building settlements, of human rights violation, of actually having the consent to every policy that the Israelis undertake toward the Palestinians. And therefore, we're standing here to say that we need to end U.S. aid to Israel, especially at a time where we are actually having a sequester of our budget, where we're cutting programs, healthcare, education, support for the elderly, Head Start, all that support that is being cut and sequestered from the budget. Instead, we're actually allocating furthermore support for the Israeli economy, for the Israeli military, and that aid has to be cut. The third point about apartheid. Apartheid is a concept that was developed in South Africa in 1948 that created two separate sets of laws, one applicable to blacks in South Africa and one is applicable to whites in South Africa. If we look at what is happening in Palestine today, we see that there is an effective apartheid system in practice. This is what Bishop Desmond Tutu, when he visited Palestine, he said it reminded him so much of what the blacks in South Africa have suffered. In Palestine, you have streets that are also set on apartheid, streets that are only for Jewish settlers and streets that are all for the Palestinians. Palestinians are not allowed to build in certain areas while settlers and the Israeli government are allowed to build in certain areas. Not only that, but Israel actually prohibits Palestinians from having the human rights exercise of being able to live as families and be able to marry and bring their husband and wife to the place where they live. If you're a Palestinian living in Jerusalem and wanting to marry someone from the West Bank, by law, you are not allowed to bring your wife or husband to live with you. Furthermore, Israeli bypass roads actually intersect and cut Palestinian cities and towns in such a way that towns that have settlements on both sides are subject to a particular set of laws, that the Palestinians will be subject to one law and the settlers are subject to another set of law. Furthermore, water resources are subject to apartheid law. Airspace is subject to apartheid law. Electric distribution and centers of distribution are subject to apartheid law. And therefore what we say is that here in this country, just like Carter said, peace, not apartheid, we're saying today that we need to stop supporting an apartheid regime. We have brought victory to South Africa by being mobilized for human rights, for justice, and for ending apartheid in South Africa. Today, we're actually funding apartheid in Israel, and it's time for us to stop funding apartheid and to stand for universal justice. Just like we have justice in here and we promote the rule of law, we need to promote the rule of law in Palestine. We can't speak from both sides of our mouth. While we're speaking for democracy on the one hand, we're speaking and funding apartheid on the other. This has to end. Now, lastly, about our ad campaign on the subway. As many of you, there has been many ads that have been placed on the subways and on the buses in New York, in San Francisco, and Chicago by individuals that have used Islamophobia as a way to try to garner U.S. support for Israel. Our response is that public consciousness is an important way for us to influence the civil society, to say that when the politicians have failed because they have been paid too well to support Israel, we as a civil society have to take matters to our hand and to change public opinions and to begin to say that these policies that support apartheid, support Israel, must end, and collectively as a civil society will make a difference. This campaign starting in New York, will be taken to Chicago, taken to Washington, to San Francisco, and across the country to say that we are actually, as a civil society, mobilizing to make an effect, an impact on changing U.S. policy toward Palestine and hopefully toward the Middle East in general. Thank you.
Open the floor up if are there any questions? Go ahead. No, actually it has nothing to do with Passover. It was the time slot the ad agency had open, and our ads actually, they were up and posted by last Friday actually. Yeah, I have an email on the 22nd from Howard Marcus of CBS Outdoor. So no, it had nothing to do with Passover. Another question? No, actually, when we've been in negotiations with the ad agency for months, and so this was agreed upon many months ago. I didn't have a calendar in front of me. I did not look at holidays at that time. It has nothing to do with Passover. The ADL is very good at trying to throw red herrings out there to obfuscate what the real issues are. And this is one thing they're trying to capitalize on. And we do wish all of our Jewish friends a good Pesach, by the way, for their holiday. I'm going to let Dr. Hatem speak to that, but you know, I think that what we need to remember, we're talking about human rights and international law. We're not talking about Judaism or anything like that. So this is a political issue. It's not a religious issue. And I'm going to turn that question over to Dr. Hatem.
The timing of the ads was subject to the advertisement agency, and we took the slots based on their availability. And our Jewish allies and organizations that work with us have not expressed any concern whatsoever. And they said, actually, what a better day for us to actually speak for justice on such monumental events in human history. So as such, we see that any day is a good day for us to speak for justice. And today is a good day for that.
We would also like to let Michael Letwin speak to the issue about Passover.
This campaign has nothing to do with Passover in a negative sense, but I will say that as a Jew, Passover is about Jewish struggle for freedom, historically, and that's what this is about. This campaign is consistent with the struggle for justice by any people, by every people, whether they're Jewish or not. And I'm very proud that this happens when it does, even though this campaign was not designed to be about a particular holiday. I think that holiday is consistent with this battle for justice.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Any other questions?
How exactly did the ad come together and what goes into it? I mean, I think it's inspiration, but I mean, who's influential
Well, any process like this starts months ahead of time, so definitely it was a process started by AMP almost 6 to 8 months ago. As we saw some of the offensive ads that were placed on buses, we wanted to actually have a response, not essentially to use racism, but actually to speak on policy, and our ad specifically was addressing policy, and the design was essentially to convey that message.
Anything else? All right, thank you all very much for coming. Please see me for media because it's got my contact info and other things in it. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining us.